on in this particular field? What is the structure if they have? It is it is important and it is good to know. Then you can working on whatever you want. And then I would like to talk about the Olympic movement, which is different kind of issues and very specialized in the sports field, and how does it relating to the international relations, okay? And thirdly, I would like to talk about the sport and diplomacy uh, with the case of Korea and also the martial art. And last but not least, I would like to talk about the sport and Olympic legacy, which is a bit different from Olympic movement, but it's part of it, also enlarged one, and also the sustainable development goals and martial art as well. Okay, and if anything, well, if you don't have any term, that is all fine. You can easily and simply find out what does this mean. Okay, let's start. Um, we all working in the area of sport, particularly martial art and physical activities, but you will find it out just out of the sport, someone who is not really familiar in the sport field, or even in the or someone who work in the sport field, they have kind of different perception of the sport. Yeah, they have kind of different definition, and their view is pretty different. Whether they're talking about the kinds of sport like tennis, golf, swimming, or the kung fu, or the kind of karate, what you're doing, or taekwondo, or the area, whether it's about the leisure you're talking about, or the camping outdoor sport, or the fitness only for your health or your body focused on. Yeah. And also whether you're talking about the policy. In policy is about the kind of principle and the rule and uh, the the project operated by the government or the local level of government, but they define the sport in different ways. Either they focus on the grassroots sport, which we call it sports for all, or you're talking about the elite sport, which is for the national level of sport, or the sports and the disability sport, things like that. Okay, so it's all varied, but they are in the sport, and the mostly that we are seeing, oh, that is the sport, is the field of the sporting event, right? If there is no event, it's not easy to, what are you doing? I'm working on the sport. So you training by yourself, or you just studying theoretically, yeah? Most of the things, the key things for the most of the people, general people, sporting event is kind of the figure. Okay, that is the sport. Yeah. And in the international relations and the issues what we are talking about in the field of sport, things like anti-doping or the peace these days and health and the development, this kind of different issues out of the sport is also talking in the sport these days. Yeah, so it's quite varied. So what do you mean by sport? What I have thought about sport is important, and if you start from your understanding of a sport, then easily you can enlarge what the others think. But if you don't have clear understanding what you are thinking about the sport, or you only assume that my sport is the only sport, the perception of my sport is the only way of the understanding of sport, it's really hard to communicate through the sport. In international field, everybody has different term. So this kind of understanding of the different terminology is kind of the basic of understanding cross-culture, you know, understanding. Okay? So sports is also the area which you can include many things. For example, like if you're talking about the concept of sport, the European Union and the Council of the European Union in law, they have clear define they clearly define sport is all form of a physical activity which is through casual or organized participation aimed at improving physical fitness and mental well-being. So here the mental has been involved in. So the discussion over the controversial issues whether e-sport is the sport or not, which we struggled a few years ago. Yeah, here clearly not mental is included, yeah, and social, to form social relationship or the obtaining result in competition at all levels. So it's not only about the elite, but also only for grassroots. Okay, it's all level. In Australia, in the law, they also say this way: human activity. So it's like it focused on the human activity involving physical assertion and skills at the primary focus on the activity, yeah, with elements of competition, where rules and patterns of behavior governing the activity exist formally through organizations and is generally recognized as a sport. Okay, so the AU active recreation is different from the sport as well. In your own country, all has probably different way of definition of sport. If you have the law, they're supposed to have the clear definition. If you don't have a specific sport law, still you have to think about the definition as well. In Korea these days, we recently, only this year we made our framework of the act for sport. So before we have kind of the partial work for the sport, so that doesn't really need the definition of a sport, but now we're starting to have it. Okay, so if you don't have it, that is probably the part that you have to working on in your country, even though you are just working for the martial art, but you have to think about what our country is thinking about as a concept of a sport. Then you can think and say what is martial art as well. Okay, as I told you, the big figure of the sport is international sporting event. So international sporting event, when it has been started, it's not started from somebody else suddenly boom. It started from the local level, from the individual who would like to enjoy the matches with neighbors and also the friends, foreign friends who lives in other country. Then they wanted to make this kind of matches regularly, and then it became kind of international sporting event. So it's very natural and voluntary kind of activities, right? To form this kind of regular international matches, you're supposed to have a certain kind of group of people who has a role and the duty and also have the kind of responsibility on these matches, right? That is probably the beginning of the international sporting organization. In the sport, it is very interesting because in the sport is the only area which has clear characteristic governance from the global level. None of the area has kind of global sports organization and also continental level of a federation and also the national level of federation and clubs and functional association of your local area and also individual. None of the area is working in this way if it's not UN, right? United Nations, but different from this global sports organization. They United Nations itself has been formed from the representative of nation, right? It doesn't really start from the global level, and also it does represent from the each countries, right? But in sport, the voluntary individual is kind of the key thing from the bottom, right? From the bottom, whether if there is a people voluntarily, actively, yeah, not by others' order, by their own will, if they participate in this kind of activities, they can become the club or the functional association for the global or local, right? And then if this club people wanted to make a match in the national level, then in national wise, they're supposed to have the principle and the kind of protocol to select the players, right? Who will gonna represent this nation? Then the national federation is essential, right? Everybody wants to participate for the national level of games, so there is certain organization needs to handle this. It is probably some of the national organization of your own kind of sport, for example, karate or the some of the sports as well, right? This kind of governance is very unique. For example, like art, or the music, none of the area has this kind of level of selection and then sending people to the other competition, right? For example, like if we have great pianists, if she or he want to participate in a concours in an international level, there's no such a thing, kind of national level of domestic level of selection, right? Whether he's qualified as an individual in the concours, then he's fine, right? He's fine to go to the semi-final and final of the concours itself. So this is a very unique system because we have the kind of international sporting event. Sporting event make this kind of unique governance, right? And the Continental Federation, why we need it? We cannot travel from the Africa to the Asia or the Europe one by one. We cannot organize the matches in that way, right? So geographical, not only through the cyber world, since we're working in the offline, so this kind of continental level of physical boundary is very important. So through the sport, you can close with your neighbor country or your other countries in your continent near around, right? That is one of the unique characters of a sport governance. And so this continental level, you have kind of representatives because, for example, like if you want to participate in the World Rugby Championship, for example, Rugby World Cup, then there's gonna a number of tickets in the continent, right? For example, like in Asia, now we do have only 1.5 or 2, something like that, 1.5. So none of the two teams can participate in Asia. If there is a second of the Asian level in rugby, you have to compete again with one of the country in Africa or the Australia. Then you can, if you want that, even then you can participate in the World Cup, right? So it's 1.5 ticket on the continent. Then what the Asian level of continent have to do? We have to try to get the more ticket, right? At least half more. So proper 2 Asian team can to participate in the Rugby World Cup, something like that. This is all because of the power of the sporting event. There are so many countries want to participate in the global level, right? So this kind of hierarchy is very unique character, and also this is the reason, one of the reasons why the organization like UN want to cooperate with a sport organization. For example, like in the UN, if there is one resolution has been selected for anti-doping or whatever, human right, then it takes hours and hours and ages and lots of money spent once that resolution can be reviewed and implemented in the local level to the individual. It takes ages. That's why UN is so big, but it's not really it's really inefficient. But for example, like FIFA, if they change just one rule in football, yeah, every small clubs in the local level, they all apply that. Just one thing, right? If they do not following the rule, then they are not doing the football, right? So this is the kind of the efficiency what a sport has. Voluntarily, people all over the world willing to follow the rule, right? So this kind of unique governance can be the power of sport itself, right? Okay. So this is one of the small bit of the organizations working internationally. If you Google or just looking for the certain keyword and international level of organization, there are so many international sporting organizations which you can contribute your own talent also and also your ideas. Then your areas, if you have goodwill of whatever the issue is, it is perfectly working in international level. Okay. And then, in the international level of sport, what is the big then trend? The big trend, what is the main core trend? That is the Olympic movement. Because we all know the IOC, right? As an international global sports organization, it has it has Olympic Games in every 4 years, and they, with the power of this name and the game, they do have a certain kind of movement which they can contribute to the building a peaceful and better world. In the beginning, you started to the educating youth through sport. So it's just like us. And nowadays, UNESCO, they also wanted to do this. They wanted to educate and develop the youth through sport. So that's why the UN and UNESCO and the UN want to cooperate with IOC closely. Okay, in our Asian region, they're also working closely. But in Olympic movement, they have the kind of their own law, which is called the Olympic Charter. Okay, so there are three main constituents of the Olympic movement are the IOC as an organization, which actually implement what the Olympic movement is supposed to do, and international federations, which is a global sport organization of each sport, and also National Olympic Committee, which is working for the IOC's the kind of the movement in your national level. So every country has kind of a National Olympic Committee, right? Right. And if you look a little bit deeper in the Olympic movement, the supreme authority of the movement, Olympic movement is IOC, and also established in 1894 by the Baron Pierre de Coubertin, right? And one of the politicians said this is great symbol. Yes, the Olympic symbol itself is a symbol, but we are following the wheel, and we are happy to follow it voluntarily, right? And this is because they wanted to foster world peace and communication through the revival of the Asian Olympic Games. So basically the philosophy, what they're trying to follow is the Olympism. Here, the Olympism is in the charter. So they wanted to following this charter, okay? So what people said, is that Olympic movement is Olympic game? No, Olympic game is part of the Olympic movement, right? So you are all in the Olympic movement because all our martial art is potentially, or nowadays, they are the Olympic games. Even though your game is not in the Olympic competition, still it's in the boundary of Olympic movement because you also can do the youth development and youth education through your physical activities. So nowadays you don't need to think that because my game is not Olympic sport, so I'm not part of the Olympic movement. No, you don't need to think about that ways. Yeah, it's far more than the boundaries of Olympic Games. For example, like in Paris, the breakdance and some of the kind of new sports is part of it. None of the people think about that this became the Olympic sport before, and it's changeable. It's changeable. So every physical activity has a potential as long as it is willing for the youth and is worth for the changing the world. Okay. So the Olympic movement is comparable to the United Nations, as I told you. Yeah. And I also told you why this UN, the organization, wanted to cooperate with the IOC and sport organizations as well. In terms of the network here, the UN OSDP, that does not exist anymore because before this UN OSDP is working as kind of the mediator between UN and the sport field. But nowadays, they understood each other so well. For example, like if UNESCO in Bangkok wanted to do some kind of youth program in the Africa, in the Mauritius, in some local in the Mauritius, then they tried to contact to the kind of judo federation in the local of Mauritius to make the project together from the UNESCO in Bangkok. So it's all in detail. It doesn't need this kind of the mediator anymore, and the mediator can't handle this all small bit of the interrelations, right? So since the big part of UN fully understand what's going on in the big part of sport and this whole governance, so now the UN small project can find their proper partner immediately, okay, but indirectly. That's the differences. So now they don't working anymore. But UNDP, UNEP, UFA, they all keen to work with sport, and you want to use the sport power of sport. Okay. And why the nation, as a policy, they are interested in the Olympic game, because the Olympic game is the worldwide one. Why the nation supposed to? Why nation started to focus on this sporting event and sporting movement? Because it has a power in political terms, right? So they before argued that a number of Western European governments have proceeded in recent years in the belief that there is a political value in sport success, right? Which is worth paying for. If you want to say my country as a politician, I am I'm happy and I've succeeded to run this country properly. How can you revere this? Yeah, just to see the kind of international performance of our country in the international sporting field. It's easy to say that, yeah, we are top number one, we are number two, we have gold medal, silver medals, yeah, things like that. Because in the international sporting event, you're not only showing the people's talent, you also shows the technology, the development of your country's training method and the human power and the system and the policy support as well. So it's kind of the complex kind of the art for this focused on the sport. So that symbolically shows how your country has been developed and how your leadership in political wise has been good, right? Particularly during the Cold War, sport has been used propaganda. I don't know whether all your country has kind of this political country, controversial. We do have that in Korean Peninsula. It's very famous and one of the oldest and last lefted one. And we still have probably North and South Korea. If we compete in one kind of sporting field, we are kind of fighting very brutally. But and internationally during the Cold War in North and South, and not North and South, and East and West, the ideological conflict has been very serious. And at that time, I remember when I was in primary school, it was like 1984, 1980 Olympics. The match between Soviet Union and former Soviet Union and United Nations, USA was kind of the war. It doesn't really end until the end. So yeah, the Cold War, during the Cold War, this has been used. Sport has been used as a propaganda, but it also shows the symbolic political power of the country. Post-Cold War, the Olympic sport was increasingly viewed as a vehicle for assisting international recognition of emerging states. Yep. Post-Cold War, many big and small nations has been independent from the Soviet Union and also the Africa and also other countries. It is hard to be recognized as a united nation as a nation. For example, like Korea, North and South Korea, we only recognized as a nation through the UN after 1988 Seoul Games. So 1991, we have recognized as a country from the UN, North and South Korea together. Before that, United Nations, it's hard because it's political. So it's hard to accept one country as a nation. But in the Olympic field, in the Olympic movement, it's much easier. It's recognition of the country as a group of people of the sport. Yep. So it's much easier. The number of the country, what the IOC count is much more than what the UN counts. Yeah. So for the small countries, let's have kind of symbolic way of the showing our recognition, it's also diplomatic decision. It's also diplomatic, and it's even popular than the political diplomacy to the people of the nation, right? So people's aware, oh yeah, my country is represented in the international sporting event. If they perform well, that's the best. Even though they don't, but through the opening and the ending, you see what my country shows like it, right? So this kind of political power is more empowering the Olympic movement and what's the meaning of Olympic movement in international relations. So, in Korean cases, we are keen on to hosting in global sporting event. We host summer and winter and World Cup and IAF World Championship. We keep hosting, swimming, universiade, and we trying to do best because one of the reasons is also the symbolic power of the sporting event, and also it is also important to keep using the infrastructure what you have built once with a huge kind of budget, right? So if you just establish the lots of facilities, for example, like winter sports, you have to have long kind of slope for the bobsleigh, Lucy, skeleton. You never use it for the normal people, and if you just spend lots of money there and you don't use it anymore, then it will be it calls white elephant. How imagine how elephant eat a lot. Yeah. So that blame that became huge blame to the politicians from the people. So we keep hosting the games, which can use the same infrastructure again and again. Yeah. And that's most of the countries which once host the games, the strategy, how can they host this continuous game? Luckily, we do have lots of sporting event and continental level on the international level. So there are no no way that you don't get any sporting event. Then people now more keen on how to using the sport diplomacy, but it is also important to conceptualizing this diplomacy, whether it's diplomacy through sport or diplomacy of sport. For example, like when Koreans say about the sports diplomacy, is the time that we got kind of the fault judgment in the international sporting match. Yeah, if you got the misjudgment, then the media starting to say about our power of sport diplomacy is very weak. So we lost the game. So we got the misjudgment. Yeah, that's clearly about the diplomacy of sport. Yeah, in the matches, whether relations with the judges, whether we have strong relations with the judges, or we do have clear understanding of the rules or things like that. But diplomacy through Olympics, through sport, is like such North and South Korean cooperation through sporting events. So actually, how sporting became kind of the impetus to the as a source for the diplomacy itself. For example, like China and Taiwan, how they can use the sport as for the peace of their relations or things like that. It's a diplomacy through sport. Yeah. But once they fighting in the matches, whether who lose, who win, this kind of issue is about the diplomacy of sport, in the sport, yeah? Hosting game, whether our country hosting game or not. So it applies to the every kind of issues relating to the sport. Diplomacy of sport, diplomacy through sport, like development through Olympics, development through sport, development of Olympics. Development of sport is different. Development of sport is about development of sport itself for the athlete, infrastructure or the kind of the system of the federation and organization, yeah. But development of sport is about using the sport as a tool for national or international level of development. So that's a bit different. In Korean cases, if you're talking about the diplomacy through sport, North and South Korea, when they have kind of different regimes, so in North Korea, they all have military dictatorship and conservative and totalitarian dictatorship. In South Korea, when we do have military dictatorship and the conservative and now liberation, it's all different. Sometimes international relations during the Cold War and post-Cold War is totally different. But what I want to focus on here is the relations and discussions and talks between North and South Korea about sport is keep going on. Yeah, that's one of the things I really like. It's very regular. Every 4 years for about the Olympics. Every 2 years for about something else. Asian game. Yeah, every 4 years for about championship in certain sporting, which North and both for North and South both closely strong is kind of table tennis, things like that has been kept discussed, right? So it had people said, well, soft power sport as a soft power doesn't have that much power because once the political issue has been arise, so they ask you to stop, then you have to stop. Of course, that is kind of the national, security, national, safety. So you have to follow the order, but it's not only a self-continent kind of method that following the political order always. We sometimes open the discussions when the political relation is really, really bad. Sport became the issue of and clue to discuss to start the discussions. So it also has the power and it's not small. And I don't really personally like keep saying the soft power. It's not soft at all. It's sometimes even harder than those normal hard politics. So I would like to say hard powers in soft power. It's very complicated. Because even though it's symbolic, North and South sport has been achieved a lot more than what political can do. We do have our unified team name. North and South Korea has different name of the country, but in terms of sport, if we have the one team, then we have a name, which is Team Korea. Of course, we have huge dispute. What kind of name do you want to use? For example, like in North Korea, even though it's a symbolic, they are very serious, so they want to make the team name as a unification. So even though it's symbolic, we want to use the unification. But South Korea is a bit doubt about using that name. And other than if it's not the unification team, the North Korea want the only team. They want to symbolize this as much as possible. In that sense, I think North Korea even has strong willingness to make the symbol more like a concrete one. But South Korea only accepted kind of unified team, so it concluded as Team Korea. We agreed our national kind of sporting anthem. It's 1920 version of Arirang, which is very folk song of North and South Korea. Why 1920 version? Because since then we have different versions of Arirang, various versions of Arirang. We can't find the same Arirang after 1920s. So 1920 version is the latest one that we can find as a common, right? So we found that. And the flag, which of course has been suggested from the IOC. So we do not include that Dokdo, which is a small island. So still we have kind of dispute with Japan. But that is not included in this flag. That is one of the problem. But anyway, we have the kind of Korean peninsula shape of the flag as well. So sport, even though it's soft power, has more concrete way of kind of the symbolic way of one team. And also in 2018 Pyeongchang Winter Games, just if you go back to the kind of 6 months ago, the Pyeongchang Winter Games, if you see the newspaper of the time, you will be very shocked because at the time we're talking about the missiles from the North Korea to South Korea, and the statement from the America is very strong toward North Korea. So one of my friends from Canada, who is a reporter, she actually seriously called me to come to Korea to see the scene of the war, and I wasn't really sure about that, and she was really surprised why I am so relaxed in this situation. But it's pretty normal in Korea, but also we have seen many times how this can be solved. But nobody at the time really expected that North Korea participate to the Winter Games. Nobody really expected. But as a policy researcher, I kept saying, I wasn't that confident, but I kept saying something gonna happen. Sports gonna do something, because that's history. History keep repeated. It was very, very, very serious, but eventually North Korea participated in Winter Games, and also we made one team in women's ice hockey. Yeah, even made one team. Why is women's ice hockey? It's strategical, because we had an experience of making one team in table tennis in 1991 for the World Championship in Japan in Chiba. We won. We won. We beat. We bet. We defeat China. It was a top ranking of the time. But as one team, we won at that time. Since then, it is hard to make one team in certain sport, because the gap between North and South Korea of each sport is a bit huge. And also, at that time, it's a bit military regime in Korea, so the government can order athletes to do whatever the government want. But nowadays, each of the athletes, human right and individuals' decision is very important for their career and for their life. So the government or the top organization cannot really order a person to do what we want. So if this is lifetime chance to participate in the Olympic Games, then how can government certainly cut the number of people, half of that, to make the one team with North Korea, which is, we think, is not really qualified, because the way that we making one team between North and South Korea, North Korea always want to make a equal number of people. So 5 women from North Korea, then the 5 women from the South Korea. But it's not acceptable for the Korean athletes. We all want, the reason that we're making one team to South Korean perspective is to win the game. So we have to cut from the top to the depends on the level. Then of course there are many good players in the South Korea. Then it's not acceptable for North Korea, because their reason to make one team is symbolic unification, not for the medal, right? So the purpose to make one team is totally different. And from there, we do not really agreed on. That's why it is hard to make one team. But in women's ice hockey, it made, because both countries' women's ice hockey is not really strong enough to win the medal, and not enough athletes as well. That's why it is possible. Yeah, that's why luckily it has been possible. So now I keep suggesting, if you want to make one team in one sport, then we have to train them together from the youth. Yeah, then from the youth, if we train together, then you understand each other more, and there's no dispute whether who is more, who is better, who is what, right? And youth is really good to open their mind and cross-cultural understanding. So that's one way, that makes much more North and South Korean close easier. Yeah. And here is Thomas Bach and President Moon, former President Moon, actually met in the Taekwondo Championship in the Muju before 6 months. 6 months before the Winter Games, and here there has been discussed. And in this Taekwondo Championship, the North Korea has been participating for the demonstration team. There, even though the discussion is not really good, dialogue is really brutal, but there the top level of decision has been made that okay, North Korea will participate in the Winter Games, whatever the situation is. That is a behind story, kind of. So it's like a sport diplomacy. Here, the famous Korean figure skater Yuna Kim, you all know or not? If you're not the figure skating fan, of course you can't know her. But she's quite famous, and she's also She achieved really a high level of the achievement in the figure skating, because Korea is not a strong country for winter sport, and particularly in figure skate. And also, as a policy researcher, if I see the structure of the sport development, figure skating one of the latest one that we can really achieve in the goal for the world level. But she did. That's why we really I think she achieved a good one. She talked about the Olympic Truce Resolution for the Pyeongchang. Since 1994, UN adopted a resolution which is about there is no terrorism, no violence accepted in the Olympic and sporting field since 1994 Lillehammer. Before, there's no UN official resolution, whatever happened in international sporting field. Ancient Olympic game, which in Rome, in Olympia. At that time, there was Olympic truce, which is stop the war between the nation for 2 months during the Olympic period, because at that time the Olympic was a kind of retour thing, for the Jews, right? For the Jews, you don't fight. For the Jews, for the ritual ceremony, you don't fight. That's the Olympic truce, and it revived in modern Olympic Games, right? Through the UN. So here, what Yuna said, I have experienced the power of sport by participating in the Olympics twice and conducted a role as a goodwill ambassador of UNICEF, UN organization for the children. And the Pyeongchang Olympics will be a stage to share the Olympic spirit, such as peace and humanity, with the world. That's what she said, and she asked to adopt the Olympic Truce Resolution for Pyeongchang. Okay? As I told you, sports for development and sports development, the differences has been here, described here. So sport development, activities for increasing sport participation and performance. What you are doing, what you're working in your field is probably sport development of your own sport, right? But in the worldwide, sports for development is also getting bigger. The field of sports for development is getting bigger and bigger. Someone who worked in the sport development, like you in your country, can do and can contribute sport for development internationally. Yep. Some people said it's sports plus, and plus sports concept is all same. And the organization, like UN, from the UN, and to the nation, and non-government organization, and now these days even private sectors like Nike, Adidas, where the corporate, from the corporate social responsibility, they start working for using sport for the development of the world, for better world. And nowadays, ESG, environment, social values, and the good governance, this also became very important, kind of the review, see how the corporate is healthy and stable for their proper running. Under the UN, all know the Sustainable Development Goals, which is developed from the Millennium Development Goal. Now we have a kind of 70 categories where whatever, even though it's not the sport, but we are focusing on sport. How sport can contribute in each section is one of the key things in globally need to be discussed, and also needs to be a thought. For example, like I write in Korean as well, no poverty and general hunger, and also good health and well-being, quality education, gender equality, clean water and sanitation. You probably simply notice that, these things among the 17s is easily can achieve through our life, through the sport activities, right? Through sport activity, you can get some money and also the sources to to no poverty, zero hunger, and good health and well-being directly, quality education directly, gender equality. You can empower the girls through the sport, clean water and sanitation through the while you're doing the education. You can achieve these things. For example, like I've seen one campaign from the World Vision or the Good Neighbors. They give the money to the children to go to the school, they don't go. But in 2012 London Olympic, as the Olympic legacy project, they taught the teachers in the vulnerable areas, vulnerable places, the physical education teachers. What they teach to them is how to run the funnest course classes with the vulnerable circumstances without any equipment. How can you run the most exciting class? Yeah, they taught this kind of skills to the school teachers. Once they back to their country and they run this course, and the kids come to the school without any money or the support. Once they come to the school, not only learn the knowledge about mathematics or whatever, they also learn how to live properly for clean water and sanitation and just normal things. Yeah, just normal. Before you eat something, you have to clean your hands. After you go to the bathroom, you have to do something. Things like that. They learn this kind of life skills through the classes, and then they go back to home back home. Then it's much better life has been, life cycle has been made. So sport class, fun sports class, exciting sports class can make this kid's life better, has been revered through the 2012 Olympic Legacy Program. This has been introduced to the London Olympic Committee, so has been really impressed many people. So these kind of things, you can match your project of your local project of your classes with Olympic Legacy and also the SDGs. That is all for today. I would like to show you how your sporting talents can reach out to the global level, to the UN and also worldwide, and actually how has it been used. I try to focusing on the time, so I speak a bit quickly. If you have any question, I'm happy to accept one or two, or the comments, whatever you want to say. No? Very quiet?
Okay. Hello. Thank you so much, teacher. Thank you for your